Good morning, everyone. How is everyone doing this morning? Good, good. We're working out a couple of technical issues right now, but we will get started in just a moment. Yesterday, as you probably know, was demanding for everyone. The sessions, I thought, were really, really powerful, particularly the one with the students last night and the one on school shootings at lunch were remarkable. So I'd like to start this morning by thanking those folks for their work and their contributions to important conversations. Please. And then I'd also like to thank the people who helped make this symposium possible. I'd like to start by recognizing the members of the board of the Trust for Trauma Journalism who are in attendance today. Julie, you can stand, Julie, it's okay. Let people see you. Javier, Scott. I don't think we see Martin here yet, do we? Nope. Oh, okay, that's okay. We just want to thank him and make him know that he's appreciated. Our colleagues in institutional advancement led by Dana Cummings and her superb team. Dana, stand up and let people see who you are. The folks who have provided the meals here, Diva and her team, I don't know if they can hear us, but anyhow, let's clap loud enough so that they know that we value them. And this one, I want to hear a lot of applause. The folks on my team from the Pulliam School of Journalism, starting with Ryan Gunnerman, who is the director of the Indiana High School Press Association, came up with the idea of having all the high school students here for the opening session yesterday. Doug Jaggers, who is the assistant director of the Pulliam School of Journalism, Scott McDaniel, who is the department chair for the Pulliam School of Journalism, and the guy who has never stopped working on this for 1 second is working right now at this very moment in the far corner of the room, Joe Morris, who is the academic administrative assistant. Please, I want you to really make them feel appreciated. Thank you. We're trying to fix a broken Zoom link right now, so, but we're going to start this morning with a panel discussion, and the title is a mouthful, but it is an important conversation for us to have. The title is Creating a Circle of Trauma-Aware Communication, a Conversation Among Journalists and Public Information Professionals. Often, people who are performing these roles come into conflict, and they do so at really stressful and difficult times. So we're going to see if there are ways that out of this conversation, there are paths that we can find that are a little less fraught with friction and turmoil and don't add to the tension of already tense situations. I'm going to ask our panelists to come to the stage right now, starting with Marilyn Odendahl, who is the interim editor of the Indiana Citizen, a nonprofit news and civic engagement platform. Previously, she was a senior reporter at the Indiana Lawyer and a reporter at the Elkhart Truth. The Indiana Citizen is a partner of the StateHouseFile.com, a news website powered by Franklin College journalism students. You probably can tell I've said that a few times in my lifetime. Sammy Caiola, got it right? I know it's Crayola without the R, right? Okay. WHYY Philadelphia is the reporter and host of After the Assault, a 7-part podcast about the journey to justice and healing for sexual assault survivors. Dina Hayworth. Dina is the CEO of Hirons, an advertising, public relations, and digital agency with offices in Indianapolis and Chicago. The agency is known for several specialty areas of focus, including crisis communication. She is also a member of the Franklin College Board of Trustees and has been an adjunct professor here at the Pulliam School of Journalism. Scott Thomason is founder and CEO of Thomason Global Consultants, whose specialties include security, crisis communications, and media management. He is a highly decorated former federal agent with more than 25 years of national and international experience. And I'm looking for the high sign to see if we've got Scott Blanchard joining us. I will introduce him so that we can start the conversation as soon as he gets here. Scott is Director of Journalism at WITF and oversees State Impact Pennsylvania, an award-winning public media collaboration among WITF, WHYY in Philadelphia, and the Allegheny Front in Pittsburgh that covers the state's energy economy. These are folks who have dealt with some of the most difficult stories there are out there. And I know, Dina, you wanted to start the conversation by presenting a video. I don't know, I'm looking back there, guys, is it possible for us to cue the video? Good. I'll tell you what, why don't we start with that, and I'll set it up. This was about a mass shooting that occurred just up the road from here at the Greenwood Park Mall. We'll start with Dina's role in that. That was probably a clumsy transition. It suggests that somehow she took part in the shooting. She did not.
Thanks.
But why don't we cue the video, or do you want to set it up, Dina?
We can cue the video. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
We're getting several calls from
Approximately 6:05 tonight, Johnson County.
Gunshots started ringing out, probably about 20 of them, and
Say the gunman
everybody
had
just started
several
stampeding.
magazines.
Gunfire rang out in the food court.
Heard a gun start pop, 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 pop.
I heard this loud boom.
Let's go ahead and declare this a mass casualty.
We start too many shows in too many weeks talking about deadly shootings in this country, and here we go again.
This time at the Greenwood Park Mall near Indianapolis. And today we learned from authorities the 20-year-old gunman
and shot and killed 3 people Sunday evening using a rifle. Victor Gomez, Rosa Rivera, and Pedro Pineda.
I don't want to be among the mayors that has to share these statements, but sadly I am. I grieve for these senseless killings, and I ache for the scars that are left behind on the victims and on our community.
We say the shooting suspect arrived at the mall with 3 weapons total, 2 rifles and a pistol.
Several magazines of ammunition.
Jonathan Sapirman, age 20, of Greenwood, is our shooting suspect. He was pronounced deceased at the scene.
And this morning, a Good Samaritan being hailed a hero.
22-year-old Elijah Dickin, who had been shopping with his girlfriend,
pulled a gun, took aim, and took out the threat.
We're very thankful for a young 22-year-old man who stopped this violent act.
His actions were nothing short of heroic.
Tonight, people will be coming together throughout the community here in Greenwood, ready to gather for a prayer vigil.
We don't exactly know what to do, but it certainly seems like we shouldn't just go about our day.
He held a vigil open to anyone who needed a place to pray.
They're reserving space for those impacted by Sunday's shooting. That's as more than 15 experts and counting from across the state are offering help to heal.
Okay, I think, go ahead, Dina. I'm going to work the audience here so that, because people have been sitting for a couple of days now. So if you have a question at any point, you throw up a hand or just yell out, "Hey, John," and I will come to you with a microphone. Okay? Dina,
well,
I'm sorry.
Thanks, everyone, for being here, and to John for having me. So I am a recovering PR person who now leads an agency in downtown Indianapolis that provides a lot of different kinds of services. But I thought this might be a good story to kind of level set with you what media relations folks are doing in a situation like this and what role the media plays as well. So do any of you remember the Greenwood Park Mall shooting? I don't know where everybody's from, but it sounds like several of you do. So in a public relations capacity, I was engaged by the mayor's office and the city of Greenwood almost simultaneously to the public safety folks arriving on scene for the shooting. So this was a Sunday afternoon. Many of us were just kind of minding our own business. The mall was a little bit more full than normal because it was back to school shopping season. And so in these moments, media is of course flooding to the scene, public safety officers from I think 10 or 15 different agencies. So think about state police, the sheriff, ATF, the Greenwood Police Department. So many different parties are involved in the response. Media is layered on top of that, in addition to the folks that were in the mall that day, right? And so as we think about this, we immediately go into action and being flooded with requests from media like many of you, and really trying to stay ahead of it, make sure that all of the different parties who could respond to the media are coordinated in their response. So Mayor Myers and I have been speaking on this to elected officials and PR folks nationally. And one of the things that the mayor always says is that elected officials need to know their role in these situations. So he came up through public safety, so this was, and grew up in the area, so this was important to him. But he wants to make sure that elected officials know their role. They're not going to be speaking on kind of what happened or when. They're there for their community to stand up for them. I will also tell you that no matter how much crisis you do, I mean, I've been doing this for almost 25 years, sometimes it's just stupid people doing stupid things like embezzling money or, you know, other bad decisions. Sometimes it's something that is tragic and devastating to the community. So I'm a little bit hardened from doing some of this, so it's hard to surprise many of us, but I will tell you. And one of the reasons that I kind of wanted to start by sharing this today is, so this happened, let's say I was engaged Sunday afternoon. You immediately go into work mode, right? You kind of have to like turn off your personal self and your emotional self to some extent and jump into the work. It wasn't until Monday morning at 4 a.m. So I get up early. I get up really early when I'm working on crisis, and I'm just scrolling through Facebook. And I find out that my mom friend posts that her 2 sons and one of his friends, they were in the food court, you all. So I'm like, I had been in work mode. I mean, it was my community, so it was devastating to me. But as I was thinking about my son's friends, right? They were freshmen in high school and middle schoolers. They were in the food court, right? They were in line with the Good Samaritan when he drew his gun. They had to run. Of course, for all you parents out there, this was the first time that she had let her kids go to the mall alone, like dropped them off, right? And it was kind of every parent's worst nightmare, right? But in that moment, I had to like be a mom for a second, like think about what my friend was going through as a mom, what those boys who were my son's very good friends were going through. And so in these moments, like we sometimes think that it will be distant from us. And so I was just grateful that I didn't see that until that morning. I will tell you, it wasn't until probably a handful of weeks ago, and we're a year out from the tragedy now, but a couple of weeks ago, I was working with the Greenwood Police Department, and the chief has been also presenting on this, of course, and so he's showing me his slides, and we're getting ready for some presentations. And he shows the video because they've got tons of video of this, right? And much of it will never see the public eyes. They've got this video, and he shows the clip of the gunman entering the food court. Okay, and I'm just thinking, like, we're a year out from this. I'm good. I can talk about this. And I see my son's friends literally sitting in the middle of that food court eating their pizza while the gunman walks into the bathroom. I mean, he walks right next to them and goes in. And I thought, wow, this trauma, these close encounters, like, they're never going to end. So as we think about dealing with these situations, I think just understanding that you're human and that this might hit really, really close to home for you is something that we all really need to think about and prepare for.
Sammy, I think probably, and this is a good setup, in these roles, and we can use, since we started this symposium with an in-depth conversation of school shootings, but in areas where there are going to be tensions, could you talk about what the reporter's role is, what the reporter is trying to do in that situation, what sort of information?
Yeah, so I work in Philadelphia, and we have an ongoing gun violence crisis that is largely happening in Black and brown neighborhoods that have experienced historic disinvestment. They were redlined in the 1930s. The city, didn't let Black people buy homes. They moved money out of parks and recreation facilities, and you can tell when you walk around there that it is a struggle. It is toxically stressful to live in these places, and that is fueling intra-community violence, which is part of my role in my job is to explain the root causes of why are people shooting each other. And there are many, many guns in the city, and it's a recipe for disaster. Now, when we say mass shooting in Philly, we're actually talking about any situation where 4 or more people are injured by a gun. Someone correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's what the Associated Press is using. That's what we use. And in Philadelphia, there are mass shootings that happen in neighborhoods. And it's not an active shooter in a mall or a school. It's a drive-by shooting where somebody had a pistol or sometimes a rifle and shot a bunch of people on the street, and kids had to run, and innocent people are killed. So it's those kinds of neighborhood shootings didn't used to be covered in a meaningful way, and people in those communities were really upset. They were like, oh, white kids out of school are affected, and it's national news, but these things happen in our neighborhoods and no one cares. So part of my role is sort of looking at this from an equity lens and who is affected on a day-to-day basis. Almost immediately when I took my job, the city of Philadelphia reached out to me. They have an Office of Violence Prevention. And they were like, hey, we're doing stuff. Like, we have anti-violence funding. We have programs. Like, we want you to help us build trust. We want people to know we're working on the problem. And there is just deep distrust of city government in Philadelphia. And I had to be very clear, look, I'm a reporter, and yes, I want to focus on solutions to this, what I think is a public health crisis. And the city has a role here, but I'm not helping you. there's no helping that's going to happen. And very quickly after I took my job and I started going around and meeting neighborhood activists and faith leaders, people started to tell me, so the city has this funding for anti-violence. It's these community grants, and $14 million or so supposed to be distributed to nonprofits. And a lot of them are small. They're mom and pop nonprofits. And the nonprofits started telling me, hey, we haven't gotten our money. They're supposed to spend money and then file reimbursement forms, and then the city's supposed to pay them back. Long story short, we investigated this. A year or so into the program, only a third of the money had been redistributed. Nonprofits were spending out of their own pockets. They were not being paid back. They were very frustrated. And yes, we reported that story. Yes, the city was mad. Also, I asked nonprofit leaders, how could this process be better? What do you want? And they were like, well, we want the money up front so that we don't have to spend our personal credit cards to try to save kids from dying of gun violence. we want the money up front. We want the government to trust us. And these are largely Black-led nonprofits. So it sort of like opened up all these conversations about what is the just and equitable way to support community work, people trying to save their own kids. Long story short, the city changed the process for how they distribute funds. They started giving it out in big chunks. You get a third of the money, you get a third of the money, you get a third of the money, instead of you spend your own and we reimburse you. So like, that wasn't my intention, but being able to connect kind of the people in need of resources to the people in power via journalism, that's how you make a problem known, and that's how you might be a catalyst for change. And so it was like, I have this relationship with the city where I'm informing them of what's going on the ground, and they're also leaning on me to get the word out about stuff. So it's been fraught, is what I'll say.
Scott, I'll go with Scott Thomason, and everybody say hi to Scott Blanchard, who the technical issues have been resolved, and he's joining us now. Scott Thomason, I'd like for you to talk, this is a relationship between journalists and PIOs that is fraught with tension. I'm going to ask you a two-part question here. The first is, as a PIO, what is your duty in a situation like a school shooting or anything that is a painful community episode? And then where do you see the sources of tension between the journalist who are trying to get the story and the PIO who has a different set of priorities?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. So the role of the PIO, and I was Chief of Public Affairs for ATF for about 4 years and developed a strategy for engaging with the media during critical incidents that's still in existence today, is the role of the PIO is to manage the media, plain and simple, to manage the media, because there's only so many hours in the day. In a critical incident, what happens is you get hit with 20, 30, 40, 50, depending on how big it is, 60, international, national. You get hit with all of these media requests. There's only so many hours in the day. So think of it as a three-legged stool. You got to manage the media, manage the message, act as a liaison with the investigators, only let out certain information, but don't let and protect other information. And you have to do that accurately in a timely fashion. So you are also in these mass events, which if you've ever unfortunately been part of one, and I've been part of multiple school shootings and mass shootings, is what happens is when you have 30 or 40, 10 or 15 different law enforcement agencies come together, what happens is they fall into what's called a unified command structure. And it's a central repository, it's a central control, and then the media piece is part of that, and it's managing the message, managing the media. So where the source of tension comes in is there's this automatic distrust between the media. Nobody trusts the media and law enforcement. They think they get the story wrong, they're out to get us, it's terrible. The media thinks all the police are lying and obfuscating and hiding things. And unfortunately, that's a huge source of tension, because in a critical incident where things are moving that fast, you just don't know, and you want to put out the right information. And having been involved in multiple shootings, I can tell you that the story you hear initially is never what the facts are down the road. So I was running an office in San Francisco. I get a call. They say, hey, we've just killed 3 people. We got two agents dead. We got one on a helicopter on the way to a trauma center. I'm like, oh, bad day. So jump in the car, drive up there. By the time I get there, 2 suspects were wounded. They've already been checked out of the hospital and are sitting in handcuffs because it was superficial. No agents were hurt. And that's in the course of 45 minutes from the on-scene commanders reporting to me. And so there's this chaos that occurs, and to get the story right. So what happens is the media calls you and says, okay, what's going on? Sometimes you just don't know. Sometimes you have to, and what we teach PIOs to do is say, what have you heard? What can I confirm? What can I put down as wrong right now? And we're still trying to figure it out. Well, from a media standpoint, you're thinking, well, he's just hiding the truth and lying and trying to hide. That's not the case. Sometimes you just don't know. I was telling Javier earlier, when Gabrielle Gifford got shot, I'd taken my daughters bowling on a Sunday afternoon. It was raining. And I've got Pierre Thomas, Pete Williams, all the national people calling me up saying, hey, you just had a U.S. congressman shot. What's going on? And I'm like, dude, I'm in the middle of bowling. I mean, I don't know. You're giving me news, but let me get on the horn. So the short answer is the biggest challenge is getting over that distrust of each other, but understanding what's really going on and understanding that you almost have to let things kind of play out a little bit before you can actually get to the truth. So a lot of times, initial press conferences will be, we had an event, we're working the event, we'll come back to you. That's all they know.
Can I ask Scott a question? It's like directly.
Sure. It is.
It'll be fast.
You are a reporter. It is an instinct for you. So go. Yes, please.
Okay, so very recently in Philadelphia, a police officer fatally shot a young man. There was a press conference the day the man was killed. The police said, from what we know from reports from the scene, the man was in a vehicle and he came out with a knife, he lunged, and the officer shot and killed him. 2 days later, police came back and said, we have now reviewed the body camera footage and understand that this man never left his car. So he did not get out with a knife, he did not lunge, he was in his car when the officer shot and killed him. And they said, we're sorry about the misinformation, something like that. People were outraged. Later, home footage came out, somebody's security camera in the neighborhood showing that this officer had really just walked right up to this guy's car and shot into the car. It was a very disturbing video. What should PPD have done? Should they not have had a press conference before having seen the camera footage? We were really perplexed.
So, good question. I'm familiar with this because I live outside Washington, D.C., and I've seen the footage. So, and this is a struggle. This is Dina's bane of existence. What happens is there's a lack of education, a lack of training on the part of law enforcement executives and PIOs. Most of them don't even get training. What they get is the lecture on mistrust. And then some of them think we're just going to go out with what we know. And so as a commander or somebody speaking to it, all he knows is what he's been told. He trusts the people who tell him this because they're usually lieutenants. Lieutenants are trusting the sergeant. The sergeants are trusting the local guys, and they're just saying, this is what happened. And it's telephone. All he knows is what he was told. So there was no, I commend them from coming out in 24 hours and say, actually, that isn't what happened. Where they made their mistake and what they should have done is said, and this is hard because the media doesn't accept this, but what they should have said was, we had a critical incident, we had a shooting involving a police officer, we'll come back to you when we know more. That's it. That's all they had to say. And that's what they should have said. And then they should have allowed the investigation of what actually happened to go on for about 10, 12 hours or however long it takes, and then come out and said, okay, here's more detail. Now, knowing the media, if it's doing its job, is going to be out there interviewing witnesses and neighbors and all this other stuff. But hopefully there's a relationship where the media will say, hey, we've seen a doorbell where this occurred. Okay, great, thanks. We'll look into that. Or, yeah, we're aware, we're about to issue a statement on that. So the big thing is not to get out in front of yourself. And that's where Philly police made a mistake of getting out too far over their skis before they really had validated or verified the information.
And Scott Thomason's done, I think, a good job of explaining where the friction and the tension comes from the PIO point of view. I'm going to go to Scott Blanchard and ask him to talk a little bit about where the tension and I'm going to ask first, do you share Scott Thomason's belief that there's distrust on both sides of the equation here? And if so, where does the distrust come from on the reporter or journalist side? Don't worry, Marilyn, I'm coming to you because we're going to broaden the discussion after this point.
Yeah, I do think there is distrust or can be. I also think it's something that can be worked through or developed or as you develop relationships with people as reporters and law enforcement work together. But I think it comes from, journalists make mistakes, and as Sammy and Scott were just talking about, so does law enforcement. So there's always there's an area in any incident like this where each side may come to it thinking the worst of the other side. Police are either hiding information, or they're going to tell me something wrong, or police are thinking, law enforcement is thinking this. I don't know this journalist. They're going to get it wrong. They're not going to tell the factual story. But I think the two sides need to figure out ways to work through that. I think part of what Scott is saying from a journalist perspective is good in the sense that and maybe Sammy, you can weigh in on this too, but if a law enforcement officer is telling a journalist, look, this is the first hour of this incident. We have 15 people working this scene. We are developing information right now. We don't know exactly, have two conflicting stories about what happened here. We need to figure that out, and we're going to come back to you. I think journalists need to understand that, yes, that happens. You don't have all the answers right off the bat, right, immediately. But then the second thing I would say, and this goes to what, Scott, what you were just saying about the Philadelphia incident, and your statement about that PIOs are trained to say, what do you know, and let me confirm or knock it down or whatever. So if Philadelphia PD comes out and says A, B, and C, this is what happened, and then Sammy or someone goes and reports and comes back and finds out that there's a Ring doorbell video that shows something different, I think what a journalist needs at that point is the availability of law enforcement to address that specific thing, because that's a developing fact, right, that we didn't know before, we didn't know to ask about before. It's out in the community, people are already talking about it, and a lack of information, as we all know, means people will fill in the gaps themselves, and a lot of times that'll be with wrong or misleading information. And a lot of times now, unfortunately, it's intentionally wrong misinformation, like that. So I would say that's important, that to stay connected and to not be in a situation where law enforcement says, we don't know, we'll get back to you, and then there's silence for, hours or days. I think that's when journalists start to get really like, what is going on here? Because they're out talking to everybody else who is around it, right? And they're developing facts and sifting facts from, opinions and all that kind of stuff. They're doing their job, and that there are constantly things they need to come back to law enforcement with. So I think that connection could be stronger, and maybe, and that can be a way, maybe in an incident, to move beyond that distrust that does exist and that both sides bring in.
Marilyn, and I'm going to set this up without really meaning to. You've sort of wandered right into the middle of the war over reproductive rights in Indiana with your reporting, and I want to introduce this element to the discussion too. What do you do, and what are the tensions when you're a reporter? By and large, there's a consensus that mass shootings are bad things, but there are competing points of view when it comes to reproductive rights in this state and this country. how do you negotiate that in working with public information officers or press secretaries who, aren't trying just to provide you with information, but frankly to spin you?
Writing about reproductive rights and writing about where the country is now as far as abortion, you're sitting at your laptop and you got to write the story. Is it pro-choice? Is it reproductive rights? Is it anti-abortion, or is it pro-life? You get down in these words. I wrote a story and I said pro-life, and the editor changed it to anti-abortion, and I got a call. And the guy said, why are we always anti? Why are we always anti? Okay, I see your point. I didn't know the editor did that. One of the things that you can get through this situation, and it's not a trauma situation, this is something that's slowly unfolding over time, so you can take a little bit of a breath. But one of the things, if you have the opportunity to, if you have somebody like Scott, who's always there, you develop a relationship. He has his job to do as a public information officer. I have my job to do as a reporter, and as Sammy pointed out, my job is not to help Scott. My job is to report the news. But Scott and I are both communication professionals. So that's why, as Scott was saying, he gave the great example, he's out bowling with his daughters, and the reporters start calling and saying, what's going on? And he was able to say, I don't know, but let me find out. Well, there was no line in any story, I don't think you can back me up on this, that said, when the PIO was called, he had no idea because he had taken the afternoon off to go bowling. No, we're professionals here. And so if you can develop that relationship, if you have a professional PIO person, if you have a professional who understands marketing, who understands what a journalist is going to need, you can have that conversation then. So I may call and say, okay, I'm doing a story, I'm doing a follow-up on the Greenwood Park Mall shooting. Here's what I need to know. Here's what I want to know. What information is available? If I go talk to the cops, what are they, what are they going to tell me? And we can have this off-the-record conversation. And then I know going into the story a little bit, it's not, I'm not cooperating. I'm not trying to spin the story to make law enforcement or to make one group or the other look good, but I'm getting a little bit lay of the land. So it's a little bit that way with the debate over reproductive rights and over Roe v. Wade and over Dobbs, because you're going to get to know all of these people and you can develop relationships. And if you are straight in your reporting, if you don't take cheap shots, the people will then call you back. The gentleman that was upset that we had used anti-abortion instead of pro-life, I explained, I said, this is the thinking, this is, I think it was AP style, this is why we did it. He said, okay, he said, I understand. And I was able to say, I understand your viewpoint too. Every single word in that debate is fraught with controversy, and it's very hard to write those stories. But I think the key is if you have the opportunity to develop those relationships. So personally, I'm not going to take a cheap shot, and I know you're not going to lie to me.
I couldn't agree more, and I have to tell you that there's the feeling that there's a collusion going on is nothing further from the truth. Journalists have a job to do, law enforcement has a job to do, public information officers are trying to bridge that gap between the bosses, the public, the journalists, the professionals, and then get the story out, manage the message, which is important. Some people may cringe when I say manage the message, but if it's a homicide investigation, which is occurring like in Idaho, you don't want everything out there because you have to protect some of that information so that you are assured that you arrest the right person, because the doer is going to have specific facts about the case that you just don't want everybody and their brother, because believe it or not, there's a lot of copycat people who come out there. But having that relationship is paramount, and it's not collusion. I've actually gotten a call, sitting at my desk in Seattle, and I get a call from a couple of reporters who I knew, and they were like, hey, we just heard 2 agents are killed. And I'm like, what? No, I don't think so. And they're like, no, seriously. And I said, well, just a minute, because maybe you know something I don't know. Let me count all my chickens and make sure everybody's in the roost. And I said, I'll call you back. And literally, I called every supervisor and said, I want you to personally account for, on the phone, voice. And within 10 minutes, I called the reporter back. Says, no, what you're hearing is wrong. Wherever you heard it is wrong. I've personally accounted for every person. And they were like, okay. Now, this same reporter, the FBI was starting a big trial on the Hells Angels on a Monday. This is all before that occurred, and they called me up because I'd been involved in some outlaw biker investigations in the past, and they said, we want to talk to you. And we set up the ground rules. I provided an interview, but on Monday morning when the trial's to begin, it's on the front page of the Seattle Times, and what it made it sound like in the article was that I was commenting on this trial that was about to begin and telling the public that the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office didn't know what they were doing and this was a crap case. Which, as you can imagine, at 7 in the morning, my phone starts ringing from everybody and their brother, screaming at me, and I'm like, time out. I called the reporter. The reporter's read the piece again and goes, oh my gosh. His editor had taken the paragraph at the end, moved it up front, kind of took his piece, moved it around, and I said, well, that's fine. I need to talk to the editor, and you're printing a retraction, and you're going to call the U.S. Attorney, you're going to call the SAC for the FBI and straighten them out. And they actually did. That's the same reporter who called me and said, hey. And so it wasn't his fault. But it was the editor, and the editor owned up and said, oh, I didn't think about it this way. So
I want to set up, because one of the friction points and I'm going to throw this to Dina, and don't worry, I'm coming back to the reporters because this is like a tennis match. There are 2 sides to it. Dina, you talked about with the Greenwood Park Mall, you get flooded with media requests. And one of the sources of tension on the reporter side of the equation is, how do you decide which ones to return? How do you prioritize all of those requests? Because you're not going to be able to handle all of them, which means some people are going to be upset.
So PR people are great at making things very boring and process-oriented, so bear with me here. But there is a process and protocol that we have that is a call log, a contact log now, because a lot of it comes in via like social media messaging or email or however they get it to us, like the old people call, but otherwise like people are emailing us generally. So we track all of those, and what we do very early on is to make sure that we're adding you to our media distribution list. And I know that seems kind of like a dumb thing to say, but because why does that matter to you? You want independent personal responses. You want something no one else has. The best I can do in like the moment is sometimes just make sure that you're on the list, and the next time that I have something that I can release, that I've committed to you that you will get updates as soon as they're available. So there's a little bit of that. I will say, and there's a great example in the Greenwood Park Mall shooting that I can't tell you all the details on, but suffice it to say that a very industrious local television reporter who has deep connections in Johnson County had contact with the mayor himself, right? Like our mayor is very available and has good relationships with the media in tough times and in good times. And so this reporter had set up an interview with the mayor without my knowledge exactly. And so on the other side of that, though, the reporter and I had to make some plans, make some concessions, make sure that kind of everyone was prepared and we all knew what was happening. Now, I will also tell you that that reporter called me probably 5 minutes before the interview and told me that my PR staffer that was on the scene needed to stand down a little bit because she's a little hyped up trying to to protect the mayor, if you would. And I was like, we're good. We have this relationship. The trust is there. So building these relationships in advance can matter, but also having these relationships that you can get to pretty quickly and understanding from both sides how to build trust quickly in a situation, because in these cases we were talking to some national reporters that let's just say they didn't even know where Greenwood, Indiana was, right? I mean, they are learning in the moment. They don't have a relationship with the mayor. They don't have a relationship with the chief. So making sure that we can go pretty quickly is important, but that triage immediately of making sure that we're intaking all of the information, I think is important. What we also do is we, as PIOs, are managing public sentiment. So we're managing social media and the dumpster fire that can sometimes be on several levels, right? And so what we also do now is make sure that our media statements are kind of simultaneous to what are our public statements, if you will, which is what we're posting on social to keep our community updated. That must also drive reporters mad because you want this stuff earlier to get it in your stories, but in some situations we are trying to get good information out as quickly as we can, and that is kind of a tandem approach at that point.
Scott Blanchard, I want to throw this to you, but I'm going to give Sammy and Marilyn a chance to comment too. And it's coming off of something Scott Thomason said. And Scott Blanchard, you took note of it when you said the training for PIOs is that they ask, what have you heard, or what do you know? There are times the training for journalists is not to let on how much you know, because you don't want to compromise a source, or how you got hold of some information. Could you talk and explore how the different trainings and the different objectives here add tension to the relationship?
I think journalists often have to make decisions in the field and in the moment on how to conduct an interview, or what to say, or what information to talk about. I can't really think of a specific, you kind of mentioned, if you say to somebody, hey, I've heard X, and they say, where did you hear that? If you've heard that from somebody who asked to remain anonymous or not to be named or whatever, you have to honor that. So you say that, or you say some version of it. I can't tell you, but this is what I'm hearing. So I don't know. I guess I'm struggling a little bit with that, and I'd like to hear what Sammy and Marilyn say about it. But I think one of the things that happens in that interaction, and that I think has come up in these discussions, is kind of for the PIO and the journalist to each understand what they're trying to do, and both Scott and Dina have explained it from the communication side of it, and I think Marilyn and Sammy have talked about it from the journalism side. But one important thing I think to remember is that journalists are the public. There's no third category of law enforcement, journalists, and the public. Journalists are there doing the job to get that good information to the public. So I think the more we can work to identify and find that common ground, someone in communications is trying to get good information out. Ideally, they should be. Journalists is trying to get good information out to people, find that common ground and work it. I think two things that keep coming up to me are that, John, if you could park this question maybe and ask it later, but what do the communications folks in that profession, are they addressing the question of misinformation and disinformation, and if or how to respond to that actively? And do they have people who are monitoring that? Because the information ecosystem obviously has changed massively over the last 10, 15 years or so. And in the past, you could have a news conference at 9 a.m. and a news conference at 9 p.m. or whatever on an ongoing incident, and the channels of news were much more structured, and there was less of a Wild West. And now, not only is information going to be out there and just roiling during an event, from people who know and people who know nothing, but there are going to be people who are interjecting bad information intentionally into the news ecosystem. So I would just throw that question, if you could park it, John, and maybe ask it later if we have time.
No, we're not going to park that one, because that's really where things escalate. That's where, the tension becomes adversarial in a hurry. Scott Thomason.
Great comments, Scott. I appreciate it, because when John asked earlier, what is the role of the public relations professional or PR person? One of the things I failed to mention was not an omission by design, is part of the job is to tell journalists when they're wrong, and to say, this is wrong. You're just flat wrong. This is not good information. Because by allowing somebody to print just wrong information, you actually make everybody's job harder, and it doesn't serve the public well. And I have numerous times told reporters, no, that's just flat not wrong. So here's the game that gets played. Now, yeah, absolutely. I'm going to.
Since we've got people online here, Martin, I'm coming to you. So, no, you got to talk into the mic.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm very fascinated. Can you give an example of wrong information?
Absolutely. So I'll give you two quick examples. So, for instance, what would usually happen, because I sat of a national law enforcement agency at the top of the pile, for lack of a better term. What would happen is people would give journalists information, not for attribution, but say, there it is, this is it. Then the journalists would call me to get an on-the-record comment, to comment on that information. I know the outlet, I've just drawn a blank on the exact, but it was Evan Perez for the Wall Street Journal called me several times, and I had a relationship with Evan. And what happens is I would say, where are you getting your information from? I can't tell you that. Source. Okay. I'm telling you that's 100% unequivocally wrong. Do not print that. Well, my guy's really solid on it. Well, why isn't your guy going on the record then? Your guy's not willing to go on the record, but he's going to put out that information and hope that you print it. It's wrong. And he says, well, my guy's solid. I said, I'll tell you what we're going to do. You're an ethical journalist. I respect you. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you an on-the-record statement that says this is 100% incorrect, this did not occur, so in his article that he wrote, he writes the piece, and then at the very end, I'm quoted as saying, the information that is provided by the anonymous source is 100% wrong, it's unequivocally wrong. So a lot of reporters will, but he felt very strongly enough that he wanted to put it in, and then he wanted to put the comment in, which is fine. There's a news outlet, I'm not going to name, TV news outlet, who we would call on a daily basis. They would hear information and then throw it out on the airwaves. and we had phone the cell phone for the executive producer, and we'd call him up and say, hey, what you just put out there is wrong. Okay, we'll get it off the air right now. And that would happen every day. And we kept that news outlet on our TV, and my PIOs and my professionals in the office would say, we got another one. I said, just call him up. I'm not going to give you his name either. And he'd say, okay, thanks. They weren't checking their sources. They weren't doing their due diligence. They weren't trying to get multiple sources. Somebody would tell them something and say, well, don't put my name with it. And they'd go on the air with it. And then we'd pick up, that didn't happen. And so that happened on a regular basis.
Sammy.
I'm making like perplexed faces over here because it just, I believe what you're saying, but it doesn't track to me that a reporter would just go with a one source piece of information from an anonymous source. I mean, we are taught not to do that. You have to verify it. Even if all of your sources are anonymous or on background, you have to get that information from more than one person. And any good editor, I think Scott will chime in here, is like, would never, yeah. Thank you, 3. Like you would never just run it on one source. So I know this is confusing to me.
Just a second, Julie, let me come, because the folks who are participating virtually can't hear you without the microphone.
When you use the word confusing, are you meaning that you're not aware of that ever happening, or you don't think that it happens? That's one question. And then
just no outlet that I have ever worked for would ever allow that to happen.
I would hope not. And I think that sort of plays into the challenge that we heard about yesterday with the panel discussions about, Parkland and actually having, difficult times with these time spans when broadcasting, different than print, is in a big push to get that information out quickly. Are there mistakes made? I think we probably all would agree there are. And then how do we do better to avoid that?
Young man here has a question.
My question was, do you think that the news stations are putting that information out so quick due to social media like Twitter and stuff, making it harder to verify the stories before, or they kind of just want to put that information out before anyone else, which is causing the issues?
Yeah, it was just simply put it out there as fast as you can to try to beat, and it's a ratings game. They wanted to be the news outlet that showed it the first.
And if I can just circle back to Scott's earlier comment on misinformation and disinformation, and again, you're hearing from sort of academically trained PR people here, so I can't tell you that every PR person or PIO is going to behave this way, but this is what we hope with our code of ethics and other things. So we have both media monitoring and social media listening that many PR folks are going to have at their disposal. So as fast as you all are putting info out, we are reading it and watching it and consuming it. As I said, I've been doing this a long time, so I'm still surprised at some of the technology that we have today, but just to give you all an example, as soon as a live broadcast news reporter says a keyword, I get an alert about it and can immediately watch that segment. So even before broadcast news is online as a video story, I'm getting it live. So we are watching and trying to make sure that there is no bad information out there. We also feel compelled to correct anything that is wrong in a story, because otherwise the archives are like the bane of our existence. So if I don't tell you on day one that, hey, this person's name is spelled wrong, or this is bad information, or actually you have the wrong time, or whatever the facts are, even if they're facts, if they're comments, what have you, we want to get them corrected, because you may not be there forever, and then the next person who's reporting on it is 3 years out, hearkening back on what happened, and you're going to go to your archives, right? So we really do want to correct information as we can. On the social media front, we tend to watch the comments and see if others kind of come in to correct, or if we as the entity need to do that. And it's a little bit of an art and a science, but just know that like we try to have at least some comment or response if something is just wildly wrong online.
And I'm going to throw this to the journalist. I want to refine the question a little bit, and it picks up on something Scott Blanchard said with the information, disinformation, or misinformation and disinformation. The days when people hearing what was going on only came from traditional media outlets are long past now. And could you talk a little bit about the pressures that puts on those of us who adhere to traditional journalistic standards of verifying information and making sure that there are multiple sources? Because often, if you're doing that, you're playing catch up. So, Marilyn, you were leaning in. I'm going to go with you first.
Yeah, in the situation, well, we've talked about the relationship here between the PIO, the public relations professional, and the journalist. There's a third person, the editor. And that editor is going to ride you, I need something, I need something, I need something, I need something, because when I first started, many years ago, we didn't have the internet that it is today. So if you had, okay, we got a call, the mayor's office is going to have a press conference tomorrow. Okay, so then you went out on that day, you covered the press conference, you came back, you wrote the story, it appeared in the paper the next day, and then the following day you wrote the reaction to the mayor's press conference. Now, you got to find out what that press conference is going to be about before that press conference happened. Then you got to go to the press conference, you got to take your own pictures, you got to cover the press conference, you got to tweet about it, you got to call back to the office so they can get something online the minute that press conference is over. Then you got to get back to the office, you got to write the story that you would have written the next day. That's the story that's going to appear online. Then the story that's going to appear in the paper the next day, that's the reaction story. And make sure you're tweeting about this, and make sure you're watching social media, and make sure you're calling all these people and verifying what the mayor just told you. It's very fast, it's very stressful, and it's very chaotic. And so we get calls, and people say, hey, I heard this, this is really what the mayor was talking about, this is really what's going on. And then we call the PR person, and the PR person says, that's absolutely wrong. Who's right? I don't think that the PR person is going to lie. I've known her forever, but she's hearing from the mayor, and she's hearing from the police chief and all the public officials, and they may not be telling her the truth. So you got that, you have the immediacy, and you have that third person, and you just, boy, it's just on you. Get it out, get it first, and get it right. And it is, some days it's impossible.
Sammy, you were leaning in there. Do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I wanted to maybe take us away from a breaking news environment for a second and just point people to public records. When you have the time, this is another source for you. And you're journalism students, you've done this, but I wanted to give a quick anecdote. I had an anonymous source within the city who said to me, hey, the city's not cleaning up blood after shootings. Neighbors are coming out and scrubbing blood with bleach and brooms. Our department has brought this up. We've written letters. Here are the letters. That was in 2021. The city hasn't done anything about this. People are still handling this themselves, and it's not safe. It's also traumatic for people. So I've got these letters, right? But what I actually need to do is file a records request with the city of Philadelphia to see in the police reports when police called the fire department to come and hose down the blood, and in what percentage of cases does the fire department show up and do that, and what percentage of cases do they not? Because I can't just take it on the record of one person that, oh, the city never shows up to clean up the blood. Now, I can go and interview neighbors in lots of neighborhoods who have cleaned up the blood themselves. I've talked to people who have done that. That happens. But is that the city failing to put a process in place? I can't say that until like the city gives me records. So just remember that FOIA or RTK or whatever it is in your state is your friend. It's the best way to prove whether something happened or not. In my case, the person who works for the city, who had been kind of handing me these letters, also pointed me to a city council hearing that had happened in 2021, where activists showed up and said, hey, there's blood on the streets not being cleaned up. You got to do something about it, right? So now I have at least that record that there was a city council meeting on this topic, that still this program hasn't come to fruition. I could then go to the city and say, hey, I watched this public hearing. People are asking you to do something about it. What's happening here? As it turns out, the city is rolling out a pilot program where they're now contracting with a cleaning services company, cleaning professionals to come and handle this blood, right? And they now want me to tell the public about it, which like I will, because people should know that actually, no, you don't have to get out there with bleach, like somebody is gonna come. Now there's a pilot program, and police are gonna tell you about it. So, it's all to say, like, when I first called the city about this, they were like, oh, we don't know the process. Like, we have to figure it out, like Scott said. But, just file a records request if you have time. Like, you can't do it in a breaking news situation, but it is often the only way that you can say that something truly is a problem.
Hi, this was kind of touched on before, but I just wanted to bring it up again. So 2 summers ago, and most of you are probably aware of this, Congressman Jackie Walorski in Indiana was killed in a car accident, and the first report that came out about it from the police was that it was the other car's fault. The individual in that car also passed away, but later, and so everyone reported on it, including the student newspaper I reported for. But later, it was discovered that what actually happened was the person driving the congresswoman's car was at fault. And so, there's still effects of that, initial incorrect assessment, because people assume that this civilian who was killed was, the cause of the accident. And so as journalists, how do we try and, should we try and find extra sources to verify these kinds of things? How much more reporting do we have to do when it contradicts a initial assessment from law enforcement? Just how do we navigate that sort of thing?
Scott, listen.
So here's the reality of it. Nothing in this world when it comes to an investigation is instantaneous. You gotta give an understanding and appreciation for the process. So when a vehicle accident happens and you have 2 crumpled cars in the center of the road, nobody's going to know anything really until the state police or the vehicle investigators go through and they're measuring skid marks, they're getting witness statements. So the mistake is, like what happened in Philadelphia, is the PIO or for the department, the police, comes out and makes a statement. Well, they never should have done that. The journalist doesn't say, and it's not really the journalist's fault, because the journalist is like, okay, well, this is their statement, we're going to report on this. But in actuality, it's like, well, have you completed your investigation yet? Can you, it takes time to process these scenes, which are extremely complicated. Think of a plane crash. When a plane goes down, we know that. We know how many people are on the plane, we know where it landed, we know where it took off from, we know where it was going, we know the airline. That's it. To sit there and if you had somebody, and I'm thinking of Flight 800 out of TWA Flight 800 that went down, and the initial statements were, oh my gosh, a rocket, a surface-to-air missile took out Flight 800. The FBI jumped on that. They were holding press conferences. We're doing this big investigation. ATF came in and worked with NTSB and determined that what it was a solenoid inside the tank had caused the tank to rupture. It was full of fuel because it was going to Europe. As the tank ruptured, the fuel leaks out of the airplane and ignites, which gives that, looks like a jet hitting it, but nobody believed them because the FBI is investigating a surface-to-air missile, and that's what they're coming out with. What happened was the CIA, NTSB and the ATF went to the CIA and said, can you do us a graphic that shows it? They did this beautiful graphic. It was leaked to the media, and then the media shows exactly what happens and put the truth out. But the point I'm trying to make is things take time to figure out. And so whose fault is it? Well, it's really, you shouldn't be putting out information unless you're 100% sure. And then on the reporter side, you need to kind of sit there and go, well, wait a minute, how do you know this from within 5 minutes of this occurring?
I'm going to hold your feet to the fire a little bit on this one, because Marilyn made the point that in the equation there are really three people. I would submit that there are four. There's the editor, the reporter, the PIO, and whoever the PIO is representing.
Absolutely.
Here. And in some cases, I'd like for you to talk, we've talked about when a reporter or a news outlet gets something wrong, they have to issue a correction or a retraction, regardless of whether it was the reporter's mistake or the editor's mistake or whatever. What is the process when the person the PIO is representing does not give you accurate information? What are the PIO's ethical responsibilities at that point? Dina, you're looking at me, so you made the mistake of making eye contact. So,
no. So, as I said, we follow the coverage, and we are helped by corrective action for the archives and for the record, if you will. Many times in the statements that we provide and the briefings that we provide, we are very careful to say what we know right now or early information or some sort of way to couch this. You all shed that pretty quickly, right? And you're reporting it to be the truth. So we really do want to have the right information. Now, we can argue all day long from a PR perspective that if you had an incorrect story on the front page of the newspaper, I would like for your correction to have the same level of prominence, and it never does. But it's so there are sides to this story, right? Which I think is the benefit of this conversation. We as PR professionals are advocating for the truth. So we want to make sure that our clients or our bosses are sharing the right information, and we want to hold them accountable. Now, they can make bad decisions too or keep information from us, but we really try to have this balanced relationship with you. Now, in the case of Jackie's death, I don't know that we would have said once a story posted, I would not have called you and said, wait, we don't actually know this yet, pull the story. That doesn't happen in real life, right? I just, some of the early reporting, we just know that it's gonna be wrong. And there's nothing any of us can do about it because the investigation has to happen.
So two very quick points. Yeah. One is you lose credibility. And journalists don't start believing everything you say. Yeah. When you're representing an agency, there's one golden rule. And this golden rule has repercussions on your future. Never lie to the press. Never lie to the press. Because if you get caught lying, you get fired, you get demoted, you end up in the property room shuffling property around for the rest of your career. It is very draconian in what happens if you get caught lying to the press. Now, is it lying when the chief says, hey, the guy jumped out and stabbed somebody and you're the PIO, you were asleep at night at 4:30 in the morning or whatever? And no, that's not lying. You're putting out the information that you were told. So,
well, I'm going to ask a follow-up on that, though. What are the ethical responsibilities when you sense that the chief or the mayor isn't telling you the truth?
Right.
Yeah, and is pushing you to go out there and communicate something that might not be true or that you are not sure is true?
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And you got to push back. You got to say, no, I'm not going to come out with that. And if it's wrong, it's wrong. And you have a responsibility because ultimately it's on you. You also have an obligation to try to verify. So when the chief tells you something, because you're within the department, you're going around checking to make sure that's really what's going on. So you're not being used by the department heads to promulgate or to further their nonsense.
Okay, yeah, so I'll give you a follow-up on, you mentioned TWA Flight 800. So I wrote for Newsday. It's Martin Evans. I'm with the Trust, but also at that time I was writing for Newsday in 1996. And I can tell you how all these things come together and get really compressed. So we got a call, a bunch of reporters were at a restaurant. We were celebrating something. We won an award. We were all together. And we get a call at like 10 of 9, or 5 of 9, because 10 minutes ago, a plane had crashed into the Atlantic right off the coast of Long Island. Our deadline is 2 hours earlier. Deadline's long past, and we got to get to the office. And so we sent reporters, while we were on our way back to the office, reporters had already been dispatched. But can you imagine the absolute chaos? The plane has crashed 3 or 4 miles off the coast. We have to get reporters on boats out. They're going on boats. The boats are going through flaming jet fuels in the water. We're asking PIOs what's going on. They're trying their darndest to give us a little bit in all of this chaos. You've got editors who they know it's 2 hours after deadline. They're trying to compress the time frame. And everyone's trying to get to the truth. And the truth is scattered over a debris field in the ocean, 6 miles long or something like that. And all those things. And we got a report. We got the story in the next day's paper. But all of these things are not abstract. For me, they were like, for us, it was a team of reporters. All these things came together in real time. And that's what your careers, ideally, you'll learn how to compress all that. There will come times where you will be doing that kind of thing. It was one of the best and craziest and most chaotic nights of my life, but it was amazingly rewarding. But yeah, you're dealing with PIOs, you're trying to trust them, you're pushing them to the very limit. Give me everything you can. Just go out on a limb a little bit. And they're pushing back and saying, the best ones are saying, I can give you what I can give you. And that's the best answer.
Yeah, and just really quick, in an emergency situation, audiences, I think, are very forgiving when it is a developing story. Like your listeners, your readers, they know it's happening fast. It's good to say in your piece at the top, this is preliminary information, this is a developing story, we're following the story. That can sort of prepare your audience that, yeah, you may be making updates, you may be making corrections in a fast-moving situation. These things happen. And you can just be transparent about that.
Dina.
I'm going to change the topic just a little bit because I know we're running out of time, and I thought it may be helpful to share this. So as journalists, one of the things that I want you to understand about PR people and PIOs is that part of our work is to advocate for you. So we do things like crisis communications planning and desktop exercises where we're saying, my friend here knows that the Greenwood Park Mall did lots and lots of drills for a decade or more to prepare for an active shooter in the food court, right? We were planning for this. There were drills done by the public safety officers. So we are trying to have these conversations with our clients and our bosses ahead of time. So when something happens, it's not the first time we've had the conversation. We're trying to be ready for you. We're trying to be responsive. You talked about freedom of information requests. It's not my first rodeo, so I will say, hey, we need to be ready for this Freedom of Information request, and I'd like to turn it around immediately, right? So we're trying to get ahead. We're trying to kind of advocate for you. And then as we think about trauma as part of all of this, I would just encourage you to all remember that like everybody in this situation is a human, right? And so relationships matter. Relationships definitely matter in these high stakes, low trust environments. And just a small example, I work for a public library. I know this sounds really high stakes, it was here. And we were in a public meeting, yes, a library public meeting. And the crowd went wild to the point that we had to take the library board into a private room so we could proceed with the business of the day. In that moment, I had to decide with the reporters who were in the room that we were going to take the reporters into that conference room, okay? So that was access. I'm advocating for the reporters. It was a very wild evening, and the demonstrators were literally pounding on the walls of the conference room to the point that I thought they were going to come through the drywall. We had to, I know it's a library meeting, who would have guessed? We had to take the wall hangings down so they didn't fall and break and hurt someone, right? It was very high stress, like you don't know about your safety at that moment, right? It's not what Scott deals with, but like it's a little high stakes. I'm sitting there with a very young reporter who's probably on like her third month on the job. And so I tried to make sure that we were kind of hanging together, that everyone felt safe. But I will also tell you that the next morning I called her publisher and I said, hey, she was in this room with me. I feel a little shaken by this, so will you just check on your reporter, like make sure she's okay? Like we all need to have accountability for taking care of each other in these moments because we are human, and that could have been a really, I mean, she could have been fine, right? But also just making sure that we have accountability from the top down in news organizations, I think is just really important.
I'm going to set it up because Dina accurately pointed out that we're just about out of time and people are going to want to eat here. I think we've talked an awful lot about, how important trust is on both sides of the equation here. And start with Scott Blanchard, but closing thoughts would really be, what are some steps that can be taken to foster that trust and to make these relationships a little less fraught with tension?
Between journalists and law enforcement, or journalists and the public,
well, specifically, we're talking about journalists and public information officers.
Public information.
Yeah.
Be as transparent as you can, as honest as you can with people about what you're trying to accomplish, and work within an understanding of what the PIO's job is, and try to give the same level of understanding of what they're doing as you want them to give to what you're doing, and see if you can reach that common ground. Address any conflicts, person to person. Try not to do it in email, but at least over the phone, if not face to face. If there are conflicts over a story or anything like that, and you can get in front of somebody and have an honest discussion about it, I think that helps. That helps really with any kind of relationship to build trust. One of the things that we've been talking about, and I wanted to really, really quickly, John, give a couple of tips to the question about how do you deal with information like in that car crash. But one of the things is this information ecosystem can force journalists to make decisions about being first or fast and being correct or verifying information. And that is a decision. The gold standard is to be first and correct, obviously, but your value your value system as a journalist and as a news organization can be to get it right. And if getting it right and verifying it sometimes results in you being second or third with the information, then you have acted according to your value system, which is to get credible information out to the public. And you can tell people that this is how we do our job. You can be transparent about it. Totally co-sign what Sammy said about a breaking news situation. Put on your story, this is a breaking news situation. Things may change, things are changing, or some language like that. There are studies and research that shows that does help people understand or view news as more trustworthy. The second quick tip, and this could also be a relationship building thing ideally, is if you are talking to a PIO or law enforcement officer on a scene and they give you information like that officer did in the car crash, ask them, how do you know that, or what are you basing that on? Tell me where you are. Is this your initial observation? Are you awaiting 10 other facts to come in or whatever? Just get as clear an understanding as possible of the nature of the information that you're being given. So then you can make a decision on what to go with, or if to go with it, whether to go with it. It's really tempting to take that first, the officer told me it was this person's fault, I'm good. Just do a little bit more and get to a little bit more, and you may find information that makes you say, I'm gonna hang on to that right now until we know a little bit more. And then, so John, I think then when, as a journalist, you start making decisions based on a value system that puts accuracy and credibility at the top, you can then enter into relationships or develop relationships with communications professionals, PIOs, or whomever, where you can say, this is my and our value system. This is what we are trying to do. And you can see that in our stories. You can see that our stories are credible. You can see they're accurate. And if there's something that you have a problem with, or if we make a mistake because we're human, we're going to address it. We're going to correct it, or we're going to, work through it in some way. And then the last thing I would say is just to every, this is my challenge, personal challenge to myself, and also to every journalist in the room and online and wherever. You can make your own decisions. There's no requirement to get something online the second you hear it, right? There's no hand of God forcing you to do anything in this business. Take the time to make a decision and have your value system be one of credibility, trust, honesty, and transparency. And if you can do that, I think communications professionals, since that's what we're talking about here, will see that, will understand that. As Dina said, we're all human beings. We understand those fundamental things about being human, and that's one of them. What we're trying to do and how we're trying to accomplish it and what our value systems are. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Scott. Scott Thomason, I'm going to give you the next word. I'm going to give everybody a last chance here. I'd encourage you to keep it brief because people are hungry and the food's here.
So I can keep it real brief and say ditto. I agree with everything Scott said. Just develop the relationship away from the critical incident and take the time to just get to know the people that you're going to be working with. And so that when the critical incident occurs, there's a level of trust there. But that's what Scott said, so that's why I agree with everything he said.
Marilyn.
Take the pressure off the relationship by developing other sources. Don't make the PIO your only source of information. You can use the PIO to help verify, but make sure you've got other means of information coming into you, and it can be anybody. If you're dealing with the police department, you may have some patrol officers are talking to you, but the receptionist, the janitor, these people know things. You may never quote them in a story, but they're going to feed you information, and you're going to be able then to start building your story, checking your resources, checking public records. Then you can go to your PIO and ask substantive questions. If you write and say, do you have a comment on this? That's going to go down the bottom of the list. If you say, here's a very direct question about a very specific thing, and you show that PIO that you've got all this information backing up this question, you will get a substantive answer back, hopefully.
Dina.
So I think conversations like this show the value of the different sides of the equation, talking to each other and understanding where we're each coming from. I will tell you two things. One is that we do try to and commit to train our entry-level staff and mid-level PR folks and PIOs. Bad ones can be the bane of your existence, right? And we understand that. We want people to be trained in this area, be confident. We want to be able to coach them. So just know that that's happening. And if you're getting static or non-responses or whatever, feel free to go up the communications food chain and get to a person that cares and values this. And then secondly, and many times this is the last thing any of us want to do, is feel free to have sort of a post-mortem discussion on something after you get out of like the days of the fire or the crisis. So feel free to say, hey, Dina, your team was not responding to me quickly enough. You really botched this. We could have done this better. Or, hey, it was really important that you gave us access at that time. So in these markets, you're going to be communicating with many of the same folks over and over. So having that kind of wrap up at the end and deciding what maybe both of us could have done better, it's on the table. It's not going to happen every time. It's not going to be appropriate every time, but just know that many of us on the PR and PIO front want to do the right thing. We want to help you do your jobs and get you what you need.
Sammy, you get the last word.
Explanatory journalism. Information doesn't have to be just a headline. Information doesn't have to be just a news nugget. In a non-breaking news situation, you can work with a public information professional to give people something that they genuinely need. If you want to talk to me offline about that, I've got tons of great examples where journalists and PIOs work together to explain the process of something. And that's a vital service that journalists can provide.
I'd like everyone to join me in thanking our superb panel for an enlightening conversation. And I would like to encourage everyone to go out and get a box lunch and get started eating so that we are ready for our closing keynote. Javier is standing there ready to talk to us at noon. Please, go get some food. Thanks, John. Thank you. Well, did everyone enjoy lunch? Good, good. Let's thank the catering staff here for doing such a superb job of taking care of us. We are now headed toward our closing keynote. Before I introduce our speaker, I'll say that the process is going to be similar here. He is going to deliver some remarks and then would like to throw it open for questions. I will have a handheld mic in the audience, so just throw a hand up or he will direct me to someone and you can pose your question. It's important to wait until the microphone gets to you because there are people watching this online and the only way they can hear your question is if it comes through the microphone, through the sound system. So wait for me to get there. I'm sorry, I'm old. I don't get there as fast as I used to, but I will try to get there as quickly as I can. We are very, very fortunate to have with us today. He's actually took part in 2 panel discussions yesterday afternoon, so we've worked him pretty hard, and we're going to work him a little bit harder now. Javier Garza Ramos. He's a journalist based in Mexico, where he founded and heads NRE 2 Laguna, a local news platform on radio and social media. He co-hosts I'm going to massacre this, Javier, I apologize. Is it Notel or Note? Note? Okay. One of the most popular news podcasts in Mexico. He is a board member of the Trust for Trauma Journalism and has vast experience in dealing with trauma and journalism. So please join me in extending a warm welcome to Javier Garza Ramos.
Thanks, John, and thank you to everyone at Franklin for really a warm welcome, and to Dana and all the administrators, to Julie and the TTJ, and to Frank Ockberg, who's probably watching, and who probably should be doing this instead of me. So I really appreciate the invitation, and really the discussions that have been going on since yesterday. This is a story that, I mean, I'm no expert on trauma, so I guess I got into this because of my personal experience as a journalist in the past 10, 15 years. So I'm really going to tell you a story that has two takes, one on how to and how not to cover as a journalist a story that deeply affects you as a person. And another take is what happens when you let trauma simply sink in and accumulate without dealing with it. Both are experiences that left a deep mark on me. It starts with the story of my city in northern Mexico, how it became a turf war between two drug cartels, and how that taught me to deal with traumatic stories. This is a metro area of about 1.3 million people. And just to give you an idea of the hell we went to, we went from 89 homicides in 2007 in the whole city to 1,100 5 years later in 2012. That's from a rate of 7 per 100,000 people, similar to that of Lincoln, Nebraska, to 95 per 100,000 people, almost twice that of the most violent cities in the United States, like St. Louis or Baltimore. It was homicides, it was also shootings in the streets between drug cartels, hitmen, or between them and police or army units. It was the whole city being terrified, more terrified because violence brought more crime, like armed robberies, kidnapping, extortion. And it wasn't just crime, it was the increase in space that we dedicated to covering it. I was the editor of the largest local newspaper there. There was also the personal impact because we felt the violence close. You know, like when a gang attacked a restaurant or a bar full of people. For example, one of my staff, a newsroom designer, was just having a drink there. He was shot, almost bled to death, and spent 3 months in the hospital. Another time, a gang got in a shootout with police outside the soccer stadium while it was full because the local team was playing and the game was being broadcast on national television. We could see in the newsroom on TV the faces of colleagues worried because relatives or friends were at the stadium and they could not be reached, and we could only watch the panic scenes on television. And we had to cover all that. It was really the most transforming event in our city. Like everyone else, feared for our safety. We feared being robbed or getting caught in a crossfire. We fear for our families that they would become victims of random violence, as in a school shooting when violence is directed towards your own community. But as a journalist, we had another reason. It was that we were not random targets, but we were a chosen one. As criminals wanted to control what was published about them, we got caught in the clash between drug cartels. Our newspaper offices, for example, were attacked with gunfire and explosives. We were threatened when we published stories about how criminals were unleashing violence. 5 of my co-workers were kidnapped when a gang wanted to send us a message to tone down our coverage of how they were setting city buses on fire in a terror way, because they had this crazy idea that what was freaking people out was not what they were doing, but rather than it was showing up in the newspaper. Covering violence every day was enough to cause trauma on reporters and editors dealing with bodies dumped on the streets or hanged from overpasses or bullets flying outside a shopping mall. And so how do you cover a story that deeply shocks you? And how do you set aside the shock because you have to cover the story? Because if you plunge into the story, setting aside the emotional impact, will that come back to bite you or to haunt you? Journalists like to brag that we keep cool under pressure, but this is really mostly hot air, I think, not use another word. I have a feeling that the bravest correspondent doing a stand-up report amid the bombs in Sarajevo or Baghdad would have been paralyzed by the sight of friends falling dead or wounded in a random shooting in a school hallway or in a shopping mall. And for an editor, like I was, there was an additional trauma. Perhaps it was the worst. It wasn't the fear of physical danger, but it was realizing that a decision I made could get our reporter kidnapped, could get our offices attacked, or could get someone killed. We got people kidnapped, we got our offices attacked. The worst case scenario that a decision I made could get someone killed, fortunately never happened to me. It did happen to others, and the fear was never far, and the signs of that fear were very distinct. And it was every time that I read a story that I knew could get us in trouble. We talked a bit about this yesterday. It wasn't an issue of if you knew that a story would get someone killed or kidnapped, of course you would not run it. But it was not knowing what could happen if you ran a certain story. And so I remember every time I read one of those, it was a heart-pounding, anxiety taking over while you try to fight every emotion because you need to keep cool. And in the end, success is defined just by having survived. And we made it 5 years, 6 years of violence. We made it exhausted and traumatized, but alive. And eventually violence came down. Civil society, media, the business community pushed authorities to crack down on criminal violence. And after a few years, homicides and robberies plummeted, even to the levels before the wave of violence began. Drug-related homicides went away, gang rivalries went away, but the scars remained. Violence took other forms. Domestic violence increased, as one example. And then one day, something that not even in the worst days of cartel violence did we imagine would happen, actually happened: a school shooting. For years, we had seen younger and younger sicarios, boys aged 14 or 15, with AR-15s or AK-47s, shooting at rival gangs or at police officers, killing like it was second nature. Many shootings happened outside schools, especially in the poorest areas, and kids were frequently had to duck under their desks, and they knew how to react to gunfire. But nobody ever thought that one of those kids would take a rifle inside a school where their siblings, their cousins, their friends, their neighbors were studying. Their violence was always directed elsewhere. Until January 10 of 2020, in the morning, barely the third day of school after the Christmas break, an 11-year-old sixth grader carried 2 guns in his backpack. During first period, he went to the bathroom with his backpack and came out dressed in black pants and a white t-shirt with the legend Natural Selection. They were the same clothes that Eric Harris had worn when he and Dylan Klebold basically began the modern era of school shootings at Columbine 9 years before this kid was born. He strolled to the courtyard of the elementary school. It's a private school. He shot 7 times with 2 guns, a Glock 40 and a .25 caliber, wounding 5 second graders and their gym teacher who were doing exercise in the courtyard. When his English teacher approached from behind to stop him, the boy turned and shot her in the eye, and then he shot himself. And the city went crazy. Of course, the country went crazy. The first thought, naturally, was about a shooting involving criminal gangs, involving drugs, or a turf war, because school shootings were something that we did not see in Mexico. We had actually only seen one only once before, a few years earlier. School shootings were things that happened in the United States. In Mexico, other things happen, but not this. And I guess that's why the reason why a police officer described the event when asked what it was, and he said it was a gringo-style shooting. This is something that happens not in Mexico, but in the U.S., or at least happened until it came to us. So the picture emerged of what had transpired inside the school. Rumors started flying around in chat groups, messaging apps, and social media, every kind of version trying to grasp the unimaginable. Authorities tried to explain it away, saying the boy was addicted to video games, the classic easy way out of trying to understand something as complex as a kid shooting a gun at school. I was fortunate to receive crucial warnings at the time from Frank Ogberg and Dave Cullen not to jump into conclusions, especially after we learned more details, like how the boy was dressed. The Columbine angle was very attractive for the media, but it was taken completely out of context because the T-shirt that Eric Harris had worn and this kid had worn had the legend "Natural Selection." Everybody thought the phrase actually referred to a video game of the same name. So the conclusion was, of course, the kid had to be influenced by video games, if he's wearing a T-shirt with the name of one. But nobody realized that the natural selection phrase written in the T-shirt could not have been about a video game, because the video game named Natural Selection was launched 3 years after Columbine. So Eric Harris could never have known about it when when he was wearing his T-shirt. So it's very easy to take things out of context. It's very easy to confuse things. And in the frantic moments trying to cover this, there is rarely a moment to stop and think about what we are doing. Nobody knew, for example, at the time that the kid had spent hours surfing the web for information about Columbine. And it was until days later that we knew that he had exchanged WhatsApp messages with a classmate where they talked about taking a 9mm guns and 12-gauge shotguns to school, the exact same weapons used in Columbine. There was a picture that emerged of a lonely boy living with his grandparents while tragedy engulfed him. His mother had died of surgery complications 6 years earlier. His father had been absent for 3 years in jail for dealing meth. It was a disturbing picture, but in a way, it had a calming effect, in a very twisted way. It was not the violence we had experienced. It was not connected to a broader criminal enterprise, but isolated in the mind of an emotionally abandoned child. In a sense, it was easier to cover this than to cover the violence that we had grown accustomed to. As I spent the morning gathering information for my radio program, putting out fact-checking on social media, doing commentary, talking to my family about how this happened, how we would discuss it with my young daughters. Then a friend, an editor of the Spanish opinion page at the Washington Post, asked me to put together an essay on my first impressions. So at home, alone at my computer, suddenly everything sort of came back. The heart pounding, the nervous tickling in the stomach, the heavy chest, the anxiety, the shortness of breath, fear and nervousness, and I couldn't place the origin. I tried to figure out exactly what the hell was going on. I went outside, smoked a cigarette. Slowly dawned on me that I was experiencing the exact same things I felt when I edited the stories about drug-related homicides and shootings and worried if we would get threatened or attacked. Except that in this case, there was really no reason to fear that. This was not like the violence we had covered. Reporting on this would not cause a blowback. It would not cause a shooting or a bomb outside the newspaper or the radio station. So why was I feeling that? In the end, I concluded it was like a Pavlovian reaction, when you hear the bell and drool even if no food is placed. And that's what Frank Ogberg told me later, that it was a residue of trauma that I had not dealt with, because in my mind, I kept equating covering violence with a threat or an attack, even if the possibility of a reprisal did not exist anymore. I still feared it. So that meant I had really not worked out my trauma. For years, I had cruised thinking I needed to put emotions aside if I wanted to keep my head cool and not screw up the coverage of a story, because screwing up the coverage of a story could mean our offices getting shot at, or a reporter getting beaten, kidnapped, or worse. That danger, of course, did not exist in covering the school shooting, but I did not detect it at first. A few days later, a police commander told me his job had been easier that morning securing the scene at the school than years before when securing a crime scene at a place where criminal gangs had left 8 or 10 people dead in a random attack. He said because in those cases, there was always the risk the criminals were going to come back and attack the police who were securing the place. And nobody wanted to transport the wounded people to the hospitals because there was always the fear the criminals would try to kill the survivors. So I can apply the same distinctions to our coverage, that violence would not be directed at us. So I hate to say it, but if you look at it like that, covering the school shooting was in a way easier. Years before, when my staff and I had gone through multiple threats, co-workers kidnapped, beaten, our officers attacked, 5 times with gunfire, which at that moment was actually a record number in Mexico, I realized I was running the most shot at newsroom in the country. And yet I could not explain why I broke down covering a school shooting and not the bloody days of random violence my city had endured for years. And that was because I never took care of myself. Maybe I had regained the lost weight and I was smoking less, and I wasn't lighting a cigarette when I realized that I still had one in the ashtray. A lot of stress just went away, but really the trauma did not. Even after recounting my experience in conferences or workshops, many times I was still kind of detached. Or maybe I broke down covering a school shooting and not the massacre of 17 partygoers gunned down by cartel members, because it was a different kind of violence. It was one that could not be explained by the simple dynamics of criminal rivalries. Maybe because it involved a kid just barely older than my daughters and victims a little younger than them. Maybe because it wasn't at an elementary school like the one my daughters attended. Of course, if I had been part of the school community, the trauma would be swifter and harder. I don't know, I really don't know exactly what caused me to snap at that moment, but what I do know is that for a journalist covering violence in our community, the call is forward, not back. Step into it and not retreat. It is important to be there, and it is important to be there with your head cool and your emotions in check, because it is through you that everyone else will know what happened. Because even though social media lock us in information bubbles where we hear only what we want to hear and we fall prey to misinformation, in tragedy, we need to know, and that is when journalism is most valuable. Journalism needs to be humble. It needs to take stock of context and circumstance. Only by being humble will journalists have empathy and the capacity to understand. We are the ones that will show up to learn and to report what happened. The Polish journalist Ryszard Kapuscinski said journalists must have 5 senses: to be, to see, to listen, to think, and to share. I once asked him how you develop them, and he told me young journalists start out content with only being there, certain that our preconceived notions gave us the clue to understand the story without the need to see, to listen, and to think. He said it's only with time that a journalist matures as we learn what we don't know. Now I see student journalists trying to cover traumatic events, for example, at their high schools, at their universities, and what I see are young colleagues being forced to grow up and have the resilience and the resistance that other journalists, and not all of them, get only with time. And still, we are the ones who will show up. Commentators and pundits will be too busy in their studios coming up with the catchy one-liners that they think explain the whole thing. Influencers and YouTubers and TikTokers will probably show up, but only to talk about themselves, to say they are there and how they feel, as if that is what matters. So we need journalists to gather the information that will feed everyone else, including the pundits, including the influencers. Because sadly, in our celebrity culture, pundits and influencers have more audience than journalists. But without the work of journalists, without the information gathered by reporters and organized by editors, they would have nothing. Remember, our work is collective. It is not done just by us, but also by the people giving us the information. Journalists always depend on others, and those others are probably undergoing worse impact, worse shock, worse trauma than we are. But still, we are the ones who will show up because our work matters, and more we are aware of the toll that it takes on our emotions and our health. Knowing that cost should not be a reason to walk away, but just a warning to walk into it with care, with compassion, with empathy, a call to take care of ourselves while we do work that helps others take care of themselves. We are the ones who will show up because this still is, as the great Gabriel Garcia Marquez used to say, the greatest job in the world. Thank you. You want to open it up?
As I said, Javier has agreed to take questions. One change, we've added a second microphone. Trinity over there is going to cover that side of the room. So anyone on that side of the room who has a question, throw a hand up. Anyone on this side, I will bring it to you. Questions? Trinity's got the better angle. She's coming.
What made you decide to become a journalist, and why? And aside from wanting to spread the word about what you do, why continue?
Why did I decide to be a journalist first? Yeah. I guess I was still in college. In college in Mexico City, I think it was a very important year for Mexico. In 1994, a lot of things were happening. At a uprising in southern Mexico, we had political assassinations, we had an economic crisis, with just so many things going on that you felt the call to sort of be there, and be in the action. And I had never really thought about press freedom or journalist safety or trauma issues until I was an editor in the circumstances that I just mentioned. And I got involved in initiatives, organizations, with a lot of people who were working in the same things, and it is just an environment when you feel that you are helping a small community of journalists, but also that is increasingly at risk, because the concepts of trauma and journalist safety used to be ones maybe 20 years ago that you would only hear among maybe the communities of foreign correspondents or war correspondents. Local journalism never really had that concern for press freedom issues, for safety issues, for trauma, until very recently, when you started seeing many conflict situations occur locally. Certainly that was the case in Mexico, and with school shootings, that's certainly the case in the US.
I'll get her.
So seeing everything like bad that you do, because you see things that even the public doesn't, how do you keep your faith in humanity?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that very well.
How do you keep your faith in humanity?
How do I keep my sanity?
How do you keep your faith in humanity?
Empathy and faith.
Well, actually, they're both valid questions, but
No,
the latter one is...
I don't know if it's the speaker.
Okay. She asked, how do you keep your faith in humanity?
Oh, my
in
faith.
Humankind, yeah.
You know the story about the optimist and the pessimist, where the pessimist was saying, you know, the world is going to hell, you know, everything is really bad, you know, things can't get any worse. And the optimist says, well, yes, they can. I'm an optimist. Things can always get worse. You know, you never really know when you hit rock bottom. So, you know, there is no way forward unless you think that good things are ahead.
Go ahead, Trinity.
Thank you. You talked about some of your reporters, I guess, being victimized by the cartel, being kidnapped and beaten for the work that they did.
I'm sorry, can you speak up a little bit?
Yeah, sorry. You talked about some of your reporters being kidnapped and beaten by the cartel for the work that they were doing. I guess I'm wondering, you know, if you can talk about what happened after that. Did they come back to work? And if so, how do you go back to covering that after kind of experiencing it yourself and knowing that there are people watching you willing to retaliate that violently?
Well, they came back. The worst part about it is that they weren't even from the newsroom. They were just random from different parts of the company. So they didn't have anything to do with the newsroom. They were just picked at random, from accounting and from advertisement. So they didn't really feel connected that they were in, you know, in the part of the newspaper that was getting everybody in trouble. But they came back. I think they saw in work the motivation to just keep going. Some of them did go to counseling, and some of them, most of them, I think, really regained their sanity. I mean, they overcame the trauma, except a couple of them that really did experience some consequences later on. I don't know if they still get triggers or if they're still haunted by it. But the fact that they came back to work, I think, really said something about, you know, how they weren't going to let trauma sort of halt and stop their lives for the moment. I mean, they took days off and they went to counseling, but they just moved on.
I'm going to use moderator's privilege here to ask a question from your talk. When you talked about how the school shooting, you didn't just respond to it triggered earlier trauma. How did you come to terms with that? You personally?
Well, in my case, I came to terms with it writing a book. So it sort of just came spilling out into it. The trigger, I guess, when everything sort of came like rushing back, it was, I guess that residual trauma that Frank Ogberg talked about. After that, I realized that I needed to think a little bit before I started covering violent events, because it was happening less and less often, fortunately. But whenever I've gotten into one of those, I try to stop a little bit and say, okay, I'm going to plunge into this event. What are the ramifications, or what are the repercussions? So maybe stopping and thinking a little bit before going into a particular area of coverage kind of helps if you need to deal with some things beforehand. And in the case of the school shooting, when a friend of mine suggested that I write a book about it, just the job of reporting it and talking to the victims and to the relatives, for example, of the dead teacher, makes you feel that your trauma is really very, very small and very petty compared to what they suffered. So you need to put things in perspective, and putting things in perspective always helps.
Other questions? Please join me in thanking
Thank you.
Javier for a fabulous. Well, this concludes the second National Trauma Journalism Symposium. I again would like to thank the people who made this possible, the Trust for Trauma Journalism, the good folks here at Franklin College. Please give them a hand. Obviously, the people who have fed us so well for the past couple of days, please thank them as well. And an enthusiastic round of applause for Javier and our panelists this whole. And this last round of applause is an important one. Please give yourselves a round of applause. This is tough stuff to talk about. The goal of these symposia is not to conclude a conversation, but to continue it. And we're going to figure out ways to continue this conversation because it is the only way we get to the other side of things. And we begin the process of coming to terms with these difficult, difficult stories. So we will be back. The conversation will continue. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking part, and enjoy your weekends.